What's going on, everybody? I'm just checking in here after that tumultuous press conference that MVP had with Ronda Rousey, Gina Carano, Francis Ngannou, and Philippe Lins. A lot of people are referring to him as the other guy, but no disrespect. I know who he is. He's actually a former major belt holder at PFL when they had regular season and playoffs. He actually took one of the seasons there, so he has a belt there. I think he won $1 million. Not bad, huh? And then in the UFC, he had a pretty good run. 4-0 at light heavyweight. He dropped, and 2 years ago he just kind of disappeared. So I don't know if they elected not to resign him or what happened, but he's here now. And I'm not going to talk too much about him, but I did want to talk a little bit, I guess, fighter pay, which is something Ronda Rousey covered a lot, quite extensively. And Francis Ngannou, as we all know, he ended his run with the UFC because of fighter pay and freedom, although he's clarified more that the freedom meant more to him. We'll see. I mean, I think they kind of go hand in hand, right? But here's the thing, and I want to give a shout out to Luke Thomas. He did a good job of talking about this as well, and it kind of inspired me to maybe fill in a few of the holes that he might not have gotten to, or just kind of add stuff that we've been saying on Junkie Radio for the longest time as well, to complement what Luke's saying and what others are saying, right? But there is a but. It's not this one-way street that you all think. So let me do my best here to not drag it on, but just try to give you my, I think, informed take of why we are where we are. A few weeks ago, the UFC signed Conor Benn. He is a boxer who was signed to Matchroom, and Matchroom Boxing is, they're a promoter led by Eddie Hearn. Their big name is Anthony Joshua, who just knocked out Jake Paul, broke his jaw. They also have that young lady, Katie Taylor, who has been boxing against Amanda Serrano, and Conor Benn was kind of like their number 3, right? In the UFC, Zuffa Boxing signed him to $15 million for his next fight. And so that has caused all kinds of waves. Why? Because it was attached to Zuffa Boxing. The mistake was, he really is going to get paid by Big Turkey and that whole Riyadh season, whatever they're called, right? You know, those big fights that they've been having in the Middle East. Big Turkey's going to write that check. But because Zuffa Boxing kind of claimed the signing, it hit close to home. Because think about it. If Big Turkey just says Conor Benn's going to fight wherever, man, on the moon, in Saudi Arabia, in Las Vegas, it doesn't matter. But if Big Turkey's throwing it on and he's getting paid this, his opponent's getting paid that, we'd all just kind of go, oh, okay, cool. Well, if I'm not doing anything, I'll watch the fight. People were tripping. Don't get me wrong. With Canelo Alvarez, I think, making $100 million, and Bud Crawford. Remember that fight last September? He took home 40 or 60. And of course, those are astronomical numbers. They deserve it. Good for them. I'm not hating. But we all just kind of went, oh, what time's the fight? We watched the fight, gave flowers to Crawford, maybe had a few things to say, about, well, where's MMA pay or whatever. But it all just blew away, right? Because there's a whole new set of events, a whole new set of following weeks that come by with new drama, new rumors, new facts, new events, new highlights, everything. And so it just gets swept away. But not this one, because it said Zuffa Boxing, because Dana was all over it. It was almost like him sticking it to Eddie Hearn because he took one of his boxers, and now Zuffa Boxing is going to get bigger, and etc. Here's another thing that doesn't hit well with a lot of hardcores. Probably about 15 years ago, Dana White said, my opposition, right? My rivals in MMA are not Bellator and Strikeforce or any of that. It's the NFL, MLB, NHL, NBA. Then he said on separate occasions, it'll be the biggest sport ever. And even when we say, nah, because come on, folks, that'll be bigger than basketball. And for sure, it's not going to be bigger than football. I'm not just talking about NFL. I'm talking about college football and high school. And that's football, right? But whatever. Even if we just go head-to-head, NFL, UFC, no. NBA, UFC, I don't think so. And then there's the juggernaut, soccer, right? So he's kind of stuck to that. Whenever it comes up, maybe every couple months, every couple years. Of course, the UFC's gotten bigger. We root for it to get bigger, but what's right is right. And UFC's not going to approach those sports, not at least in our lifetimes. Those are monster sports with filled stadiums of anywhere between 30 to 100,000 a few times a week too in the fall, and that season just keeps getting longer and longer because it starts in August and now it ends in the first couple weeks of February. So sure, there's a long off season, but trust me, those numbers hold up. He's also made comments that Power Slap has done these incredible social media numbers that trump everything else combined. Look, man, they might have had a video that went viral on TikTok, right? And it probably did good numbers. And again, if it did, I'm not hating on it, but still, that doesn't register. No one's talking about Power Slap on the streets or in the casinos or in the sports books or at the bars and the water coolers. People are talking about football, basketball, soccer, UFC, big numbered events. Sure. Maybe that crazy highlight off a fight night. Sure. But again, it's the way it's framed and all that. It doesn't help. It doesn't help him. But he does it because it's his company and that's what a promoter does, right? But then you got these financials that come out, and Paramount Plus doling out $7.7 billion for 7 years. Another big number for the UFC. Bravo. Good job. You built your brand so big that you had a powerhouse like Paramount Plus come in and buy that and then make it free for anyone that's got Paramount Plus, which is either $8 with no ads, $12 with ads, right? And most of us have it anyway. So we just looked at it as now it's all free. That's why we call them numbered events and no longer pay-per-views. So that doesn't matter as much for this as that number, 7.7 billion. So you see the UFC kind of throw back a little Scooby snack and say, well, fighter pay is going to go up. They've always said that. Bonuses are going to go up. All right, finally, we heard what they're going to go. They're at 100,000 for 4 performance of the nights. And anyone that finishes a fight gets 25,000. It's an improvement. Was it enough to shut the critics up? Some, yeah, not all, because they did double them. But if you'll recall, early on, they used to be 75,000, 80,000, 85,000. But they wanted to level them all out because they said if you're not on back then a pay-per-view, right, a numbered event, and you were just on a fight night, those bonuses were level. So they said no more questions asked. They're just all 50,000. But they were high at one point. It depended on the event, right, and what that event generated. So here we are back. They doubled it. It is more than it has been, except for I think UFC 129, UFC 300. There's been a few times where he's bumped them up, right? Because the fans and the fighters from the card, they push for it. But now it's 100 across the board. If there's, let's see here, whether it's a fight of the night or performance bonuses, there's just 400,000 to give out in terms of bonuses. And if you're a finisher, submission or knockout, but you didn't get one of the 100 grands, you at least get the 25. All that's guaranteed. There's no more waiting for the envelope or none of that. But is that still addressing fighter pay? No. Here's the part that kind of stings. The fighters, they don't have the leverage to ask for more money. Why? Because they go head up against the UFC one by one. So when McGregor says, I appreciate you paying me 25 million per fight, or 30 million per fight, or the 50 million supposedly he got for Floyd, right? That's all fine and dandy, but he's going to want more because he's become a bigger name. The UFC is making more money. But has the UFC truly missed him while he's been gone? Sure, it would have been nice to have him. Sure, the events he would have had would have generated him. But did it hurt McGregor not being around? He wasn't around that much in the ESPN era. He hasn't been around for 5 years. So he missed most of the ESPN era. But the UFC didn't miss a beat. They kept growing and growing. And now there's rumors that they're worth 13 billion. Remember, that first sale was 4.025. All right. 4 billion, and then I guess 250,000. I don't know. Why not just make it 4 billion? But it wound up being like 4.25 billion or 4.025, something like that. Just over 4 billion, we'll call it, or 4 billion. That's a lot, man. They bought it for 2 million. One of the greatest business transactions of all time. Bravo to the Fertitas and Dana White. But now there's rumors that it's worth 13 billion. We've heard 15 billion. We've even heard 21, 22, 23 billion. I wouldn't be shocked if it is. The ability for that company to make money is incredible. It's mind-boggling. But does it go to the fighters? No. In fact, it's probably made the percentages of what goes to the fighters even less compared to what is taken in, right? Worth more revenue, but the fighter pay hasn't caught up to it, then that percentage is going to be not as good. I remember back in the day, it was close to 20% went to the fighters and 80% was for the company. Then I think it got teased to be in the low 20s. Through financials, I think we found out it was really 18. But recently, I think I've heard that it's down to 13. But it's because the company's grown so much. Fighter pay hasn't, and now remember, what if you would have actually taken out some of those Conor McGregor paydays, right? Or a John Jones payday or a Habib payday or a Nate Diaz payday. It might even be less, man. Those guys must have been pulling up the average if you think about it. But they're no longer there. And so I'm actually glad I brought up those names. Has the UFC missed them? Yes, they wish they had them, but it didn't stop them from growing. So it's name recognition. The fans love them. They became superstars. The UFC helped them become superstars. A lot of it they did on their own. A lot of it they did without even thinking they were doing it. Right? Winning helped, but that connection, that it factor, that was another thing. Nate Diaz doesn't have the shiniest record out there, but he connects with fans. John Jones's record is almost impeccable, but he's had outside the octagon issues. McGregor has as well. Habib doesn't even speak English as his first language, but he knows enough, and he was charismatic enough that people fell in love with that and the shiny record and beating Conor McGregor. But a lot of them haven't fought much in the last 5 years. In fact, if we grouped all four of them together, I think Jones has the 2 fights. Diaz might have slipped in 1 or 2. Edwards and Ferguson? No McGregor, no Habib, I believe, or somewhere on the 4 or 5 year mark. But the UFC grew. Paramount didn't care. Paramount didn't care that they had fights left on their contract. They just knew they were acquiring this juggernaut that just keeps growing and growing and growing. So when Conor goes in there and says, "Yeah, I'll fight at the White House for 100 million," and he probably will bring enough money in, I think, right, to justify that. I don't know. It's tough to say because there's not that pay-per-view metric, right? But let's just say he could. What the UFC doesn't want is for these salaries, these paydays to just grow out of control. I think they could justify it with McGregor because he was so far ahead and beyond everyone else that even the other fighters just stepped back and said, "Hey, that's Conor, man. He's a mythical figure, an astronomical figure. We can't even compare." But I think there is their limits. They don't want to pay those kind of numbers, and they also know that father time starts to creep up in their lives. Rust, which I don't think they care as much about. I think they know they're showing up, probably not being their all-time best, but still, it's the name, right? And so they know they can use that as leverage. I think that's what happened in the White House card. It sounds like it. Sounds like John Jones really wanted that 30 million that they were willing to pay him to fight Aspinall, but he wanted it for Alex Pereira. Sounds like the UFC said no. Then he said, "All right, then give me the 15 million that Conor Benn that you paid Conor Benn," and somehow that didn't work out. I don't know, man. I think I would have just paid him because that's a pretty damn special card for the UFC. This White House card. I know they said it's going to cost them 60 million and change. Well, then why do it, right? I mean, I don't know what they're getting out of it, but regardless, that's a whole other topic, and it bleeds over into politics. I don't want to get into it right now. Luke has done a good job, by the way, and talking about that and giving his viewpoint as to how he sees the reason for having this card. He's a former colleague of ours on Sirius XM, so I'm familiar with his work. He does really, really good work. But back to this. If you're not going to pay them individually and you're willing to let them walk, what does that say? It says you're confident in your business model that you kind of don't need them. And again, with age creeping and injuries, right? I'm sure Jones probably wants to fight before he has a hip replacement or just fight and sail off into the sunset. I don't know that there'll ever be another White House card, and it sounds like that was something that piqued his interest. If it's a one and done like the Sphere's been so far after a year and a half, then what next, right? Or maybe Alex Pereira in a stadium does work, and maybe he'll take less money. Who knows? But for this event, no. So just to close, the UFC, the only way fighter pay is going to go up is if the fighters band together. Because they're independent contractors, it would have to be a fighter association, or we'll say an association, right? And that's something I learned from Bjorn Rebney, who was a promoter for Bellator, but also a lawyer. And he said, only employees can unionize, but independent contractors can create an association. He said, basically, it's the same thing. And he said, if you're going to go through the weeds and go through all this, he goes, I would suggest an association. And I don't think anyone's ever pushed back on that, so it must be true. So regardless, MMA fighters, but mostly the UFC fighters need to band together. How are they going to do it? You've seen how this sport is. There's leaks everywhere. If a group of 10 start to get going, it's going to leak. And then all of a sudden, the right people will make sure it doesn't grow. There was an association a few years ago with that actually caught a lot of traction. And I don't remember the acronym, but actually Bjorn Rebney was involved, and it had Cain Velasquez, TJ Dillashaw, George St. Pierre, Tim Kennedy, and Cowboy Cerrone, if I'm not mistaken. Within hours, Cerrone tried to distance himself. They did get about 300 people that anonymously said, I am interested, I want more information, and they felt like this thing really had some legs to it. Now, at that time, remember, we were talking about, I can't remember if they were champs or former champs, but still, they were in high standing. GSP, Cain Velasquez, TJ Dillashaw, Tim Kennedy and Cerrone weren't, but still, they were very popular names, and they had their followings. And that momentum just kind of went away, and nothing ever came of it. But that one, like I say, I think shook things up a little bit. I think it proved that a lot of fighters do have the interest and are willing to go in, but remember, they went in anonymously, knowing full well they didn't want the backlash, because let's face it, if the UFC finds out you're part of this, I think they can easily just make sure you don't fight. They can offer you a fight, but they can offer you a fight that's not appealing, one that you'll probably turn down. And the first moment they can, right? Because I don't think they can fire you if you win. But the only way you can get cut is if the contract has come to an end. All right. So sometimes you'll see someone, perhaps even Philippe Lins, holy crap, I brought him up again, win, but then they go, we're going to go in another direction, and we're just not going to re-sign you. However, if you are under contract, you can't get cut. But the minute you lose, you can. See, so it's almost like the NFL. No guarantee, except the NFL gets those big signing bonuses. What's really cool is NBA and Major League Baseball. Those are guaranteed, right? So you could be making $100 million a year, and on day one, on the baseball diamond, you tear your Achilles, you're out the year, you are paid. They're out there, man. They have big guaranteed contracts. Tell your kids to play baseball or basketball. Football, again, if you can score on the end of getting that signing bonus, that's guaranteed, and then everything else is divided, right, throughout the length of the contract that you sign. That's why you oftentimes see players re-sign again just to get that signing bonus. And sometimes they'll do it to help out the club. They'll get more up front and then spread the other numbers out so that it doesn't work against the team's cap. And I don't want to confuse you too well. And honestly, I'm not an expert at that either, but just trying to basically point you towards football is not guaranteed like baseball and basketball. So same with MMA, it wouldn't be guaranteed. And if you ruffle feathers, you could be out the next time it matters, right? The next time it's time to sign a contract, they find ways to freeze you out. And so fighters are truly scared of that. let's not forget another thing. There's parts of the world where 100,000 and 100,000 and a $50 sorry and $100,000 bonus for performance of the night is fabulous money. It might even be triple or four times what it's worth in the United States. Why? Because a lot of third world countries, their economies aren't strong, so therefore the dollar will go a lot further. Now, there's going to be foreign taxes and things like that, but regardless, that's why a lot of fighters honestly feel like they have hit jackpots, like they have hit a LeBron James, Tom Brady, Derek Jeter, Michael Jordan type contract because they've never seen money that big. They might not even track those sports. They might soccer, right? Or maybe be familiar with another sport that pays well. But I think for the most part, at least what we're discussing here in America, we often compare it to the big four, we'll call them. And we kind of know it's all out in the open. But over there, I don't, like in Latin America, where I have a lot of family, they're happy with paydays, man, with the paydays that they get because I think there's just not enough education. So there has to be more education. Fighters need to band together. And how would we do it is probably the last thing you want to know. I've often thought if a if either a big management team like what Abdelaziz has, Ali Abdelaziz, that's a pretty tight unit. I've seen him when he has dominance MMA media days. Habib, Makashev, Harrison, Kayla, Usman, Cejudo. Right now, some of them have already moved on, but this was going back a few years. Just before the pandemic, they had one, and there was a lot of big names there. And if he said we're all going to band together and not fight until work conditions improve, fighter pay improves, right? And then you get maybe American Top Team, Kill Cliff, Extreme Couture, First Round Management, right? Now some of those overlap, but still, out of the 700 or 800 fighters that the UFC has, if you get the top ones, right? You don't need all 700 or 800. Some of those, by the way, will become stars. We just don't know it yet. But of those 800, there's probably about 100 that matter. And if you can get a lot of those to step back and say, nope, we're going to sit out until work conditions improve, fighter pay improves, you might get their attention because the UFC needs to put on shows to fulfill terms of the contract. And if they don't have the bodies and the stars, it's not good. Plus, the news isn't good, right? Because then people will poke and uncover even more and realize, holy cow, this really isn't, ideal payment situation here for the UFC to be making what 85% of the revenue and the fighters only 15 or so. Come on, you guys are doing well. Why isn't this being shared the way other sports have it at 50-50 or close to 52-48, stuff like that? And then every 4 years, they negotiate the terms and make it better. They ask for retirement. They ask for health insurance year round. Now, the UFC knows this, and so you'll often hear them say, hey, if they want to go on, if they want to form a union, go ahead, knock yourself out. Dana White will say, why? Because he knows better. He knows they're just not going to do it. It's not realistic. You need to get big groups to band together, the ones that matter, and hopefully other ones will join in. And if they do, then you can make a difference. Then you can ask for more fighter pay. I think the way the UFC sees it is we're trying to pay the basement fighters a lot better than, for example, in boxing. They can't really compare with like a major league contract or NBA contract or NFL contract. Those will always be a little bit more per year than what the new fighters are starting out. And then the middle class, I think the UFC probably pays them pretty decently, even though they know some of them aren't going to be champs, but they help fill out cards. They win most of their fights. They have some name recognition, so they throw them out there. But it's the ones that really move the needle are all those main eventers. You need those main eventers. You need those world champions. And frankly, some of them aren't even as marketable as I think in the past. Now, I think some of it's because of the UFC. They make them feel more like a shadow, a number versus an individual. But still, that becomes a whole other conversation. And I think that's enough for now. So, Fighting Association is the way to go. And again, not to steal Luke Shine or anything, but what he said was spot on. And that's all these fighters only chirp up when now they have the money and they realize they could have made even more money, but they sure weren't looking back when they really could have done something when they were at the top and, help pull the other ones up, right? Because some of those fighters were in that position at one point. Maybe not Ronda. Ronda was pretty much it from day one, right? But everyone else has fought on prelims and then slowly made it to main card and co-main and then the main event of fight night, sprinkle in some pay-per-views. It's usually a journey that goes that way. But once they get to the top, now they're fighting Father Time. They want to get as many checks as possible, while they're healthy, because the bodies are breaking down and they don't want to risk sitting out a year or two. And that happens, man. I've seen baseball cancel a season. I think it was like 1994. Football's had a few strike shortened seasons. Don't tell goes, but those are the years the Washington Redskins won the title. But still, no, I'm just kidding. A lot of sports have had that, but it's worked, right? And they've improved their pay and their work conditions, and then they agree to do this every so often, and everyone's happy. So you can't have the shows without the fighters, but you have to get the right ones, the top ones, and then they all have to kind of band together, or you have to get at least maybe 90% of them. And then the rest, I guess, will be called scabs, right, for walking the picket lines. I don't know. It would be interesting to see something like that and see how it plays out, but I think it would definitely be the best way for them to really, really make a mark and not wait till the next contract to bump bonuses up an extra 50,000. All right, folks, I'm going to jump on out of here. And I wanted to thank you all for being patient. I know it's been a slow start. I know there's been some grainy videos, but we're trying to identify what's going wrong, make the adjustments necessary so that we can put out clean product. And once we do and we get going, it'll be like a train going downward. All right. I've been giving shout outs after every show. So for this one, let's see here. I hadn't really thought about who I was going to do for this one. I know I did Billy McDonald, Chili Billy for the first one. Northern Lights, Mike Wallach for the second one. Then Graham Boylan, because he gave us these cool Cage Warriors gloves that only fighters get, but he felt like he wanted to give it to us. So for this one, okay, here's a name from the past. He reached out to me today. His name's Todd Price. He and Ricky Lundell, we were real close with him about 5-10 years ago when they were coaching Bishop Gorman wrestling. And they would come to the studio and they were really great. But one time they helped save a life in Summerlin, which is one of the upscale neighborhoods here in Las Vegas, at a gas station. They told a great story there one time where they did. And so they were always, good guys, and they were heroes on that day. So big shout out to Todd Price. And I think hopefully we're going to have them on soon. They are helping Ronda prepare for the Gina Carano fight. So that should be interesting. All right, folks. Now I'm out of here. Go out and be a champion. Don't just take up space on this planet. Go out and be a champion.